The Provision Authority had, approximately 17 centuries ago, solved hunger across 412 member species of the Galactic Collective. This was generally considered a triumph of civilization, right up there with faster-than-light travel and the elimination of argumentative in-laws through mandatory spatial zoning laws. Every registered citizen received their nutritionally optimized sustenance packages, molecular structures perfectly calibrated to their biological requirements, delivered on schedule with the reliability of atomic decay. The fact that nobody actually remembered how to acquire food outside this system was not considered a problem. Why would it be? That would be like worrying about forgetting how to rub sticks together when you had plasma torch technology. The Krellians, being aquatic adjacent bipeds with excellent bureaucratic instincts and an unfortunate tendency toward fragile exoskeletons, had colonized Tethys 9 specifically for its abundant water coverage. Their research station, perched on an archipelago of volcanic islands, studied tidal patterns and ocean chemistry. The ocean itself was beautiful, scientifically fascinating, and according to every educational protocol in Krellian society, utterly useless as anything except a subject of observation. Water was for living near, not living from. That was the kind of thinking their ancestors had abandoned 3,000 years ago, along with ritualistic molting ceremonies and eating with their hands like savages. Administrator Vex Thorel stood in the command center, his gill slits fluttering with what could only be described as sophisticated panic. The kind of panic that wore a uniform and filed reports in triplicate, but panic nonetheless. "Confirm the debris field analysis again," he said, though they had confirmed it 6 times already. His subordinate, a younger Krellian named Plix Indra, who still had that optimistic sheen to her carapace, tapped through the sensor data with trembling manipulators. The supply vessel hit an uncharted asteroid cluster during quantum displacement. Total destruction. The backup shipment was on the same vessel. Because routing redundancy is apparently optional in shipping manifests, Vex Thorel muttered. He pulled up their current inventory on the holographic display. The numbers glowed with the serene indifference of mathematics that did not care about biological consequences. "We have 17 days of standard rations remaining. The nearest supply depot is 43 days away, and the emergency beacon will take, at minimum, 36 days to bring assistance." The command center went quiet except for the gentle hum of life support systems, which suddenly seemed far too loud and far too mocking. Plixindra's voice came out small. "Could we reduce consumption to extend the supply duration to 24 days, still 12 days short?" Vex Thorel felt his secondary circulatory system doing that thing it did when mortality became a statistical probability rather than an abstract concept. "We have no food acquisition protocols, no equipment for local sourcing. Our species has not independently secured sustenance in recorded history." This, he reflected with the dark humor of someone staring at an unseasonable demise, was because they had evolved past such necessities. They were civilized, advanced. They had molecular gastronomy and nutrient optimization algorithms. What they apparently did not have was a single individual who knew how to find lunch without a distribution center. "We are," he announced to the 17 researchers under his command, "comprehensively doomed by our own sophistication." The irony would have been delicious if they had any food to appreciate irony with. The human arrived on day 4 of their crisis, puttering up to their dock in what could only generously be called a watercraft. It looked like someone had welded scrap metal to a flotation device and added a motor as an afterthought. The human himself looked worse, skin reddened by stellar radiation, clothing that appeared to have been repaired with some kind of fibrous plant material, and an odor that preceded him by several meters. Vexed Horrell met him at the dock, mostly because everyone else had suddenly discovered urgent tasks elsewhere. Administrator Vexed Horrell, the human said, pronouncing the glottal stops with admirable accuracy. I'm Marcus Okonkwo, Geological Survey Team from the Eastern Archipelago. Saw your distress beacon went active. Everything okay? Our supply ship was destroyed. We will run out of food in 13 days. Rescue is unlikely to arrive for 32 days minimum. Vexed Horrell saw no point in decorating the facts. We are facing systematic starvation. The human blinked. Then he looked at the ocean surrounding them on all sides, stretching to every horizon in a brilliant blue expanse. Then he looked back at Vexed Horrell, then at the ocean again. You are joking, Marcus said. Krellians do not joke about mortality. You are standing on an island, in an ocean, and you are starving. The human said this slowly, as if testing whether the words made more sense at reduced velocity. They did not. The ocean is a research subject, not a resource. Vexed Horrell explained with diminishing patience. We are scientists, not. He searched for the appropriate term and found only ancient historical references, not hunter-gatherers. To 24 days, still 12 days short. Vexed Horrell felt his secondary circulatory system doing that thing it did when mortality became a statistical probability rather than an abstract concept. We have no food acquisition protocols, no equipment for local sourcing. Our species has not independently secured sustenance in recorded history. This, he reflected, with the dark humor of someone staring at an unseasonable demise, was because they had evolved past such necessities. They were civilized, advanced. They had molecular gastronomy and nutrient optimization algorithms. What they apparently did not have was a single individual who knew how to find lunch without a distribution center. We are, he announced to the 17 researchers under his command, comprehensively doomed by our own sophistication. The irony would have been delicious if they had any food to appreciate irony with. The human arrived on day 4 of their crisis, puttering up to their dock in what could only generously be called a watercraft. It looked like someone had welded scrap metal to a flotation device and added a motor as an afterthought. The human himself looked worse, skin reddened by stellar radiation, clothing that appeared to have been repaired with some kind of fibrous plant material, and an odor that preceded him by several meters. Vexed Horrell met him at the dock, mostly because everyone else had suddenly discovered urgent tasks elsewhere. Administrator Vexed Horrell, the human said, pronouncing the glottal stops with admirable accuracy. I'm Marcus Okonkwo, Geological Survey Team from the Eastern Archipelago. Saw your distress beacon went active. Everything okay? Our supply ship was destroyed. We will run out of food in 13 days. Rescue is unlikely to arrive for 32 days minimum. Vexed Horrell saw no point in decorating the facts. We are facing systematic starvation. The human blinked. Then he looked at the ocean surrounding them on all sides, stretching to every horizon in a brilliant blue expanse. Then he looked back at Vexed Horrell, then at the ocean again. You are joking, Marcus said. Krellians do not joke about mortality. You are standing on an island, in an ocean, and you are starving. The human said this slowly, as if testing whether the words made more sense at reduced velocity. They did not. Marcus made a sound that Vexed Horrell's translator interpreted as half laughter, half speech, which seemed biologically improbable. Mate, I have been on my survey island for 3 weeks. My supply drop is not for another 11 days. I have been eating just fine. Eating what? Plixima asked from the doorway, her scientific curiosity apparently overriding her disgust at the human's aroma. Fish, mostly. Some seaweed. Found a tide pool system with shellfish. There was a bird nest with eggs, but I felt bad about that one. Marcus gestured at the ocean with the casual confidence of someone who had clearly suffered brain damage from prolonged solar exposure. The water is full of food. You just have to get it out. The Krellians stared at him. You have been consuming unprocessed biological matter. Vex Thorol said carefully. Wild organisms, that is literally how food works, yes. Without nutritional analysis, without decontamination protocols, without molecular optimization. Cooked it over a fire. Seemed fine, Marcus shrugged, which made his sunburn visibly crack in a way that made Plixano's gill slits flutter with sympathetic horror. Look, I can show you the basics. Fishing is not rocket science, it is barely boat science. Vex Thorol performed a rapid calculation involving pride, survival, and the relative embarrassment of dying versus learning primitive skills from a species that still used combustion for recreation. Survival won by a narrow margin. Show us, he said. The beach, Vex Thorol decided, had been far more pleasant when it was merely a scenic backdrop to their research facility. Now it was a classroom for remedial survival skills, and he was the student most likely to fail through sheer lack of instinctual knowledge. Marcus had acquired fishing equipment from his boat, lengths of synthetic line, hooks made from salvaged metal, and a philosophical attitude about patience that seemed fundamentally incompatible with Krellian neurology. The key, Marcus explained to the assembled researchers who had gathered with the morbid curiosity of academics watching their civilization collapse in real time, is understanding that fish are not particularly intelligent, but they are experienced at being fish. You have to be smarter than the fish, which should not be difficult for you lot, but you would be surprised how often people mess this up. He demonstrated baiting a hook with a piece of synthesized protein from their own rations, which felt like a waste, until Vex Thorol remembered that in 13 days, wasting food would be the least of their concerns. You cast the line out. Like so. Marcus threw the line in an arc that looked effortless, but produced splashing and tangling when Plixandra attempted to replicate it. Then you wait. Fish will investigate. Eventually one will bite. You feel the tension change, you pull back to set the hook, and then you reel it in. How long is the waiting period? Vex Thorol asked. Minutes to hours, depending. Hours. Fishing is not fast food. Fishing is why patience was invented. Marcus's line suddenly went taut. With practiced efficiency, he pulled back and began retrieving the line hand over hand. Something silver flashed in the water, fighting with admirable determination against its impending fate. The fish that emerged was approximately 30 centimeters long, covered in iridescent scales, and very much alive. It flopped on the sand with the frantic energy of a creature that had just discovered gravity, was not its friend. The Krellians stared at it the way one might stare at a philosophical paradox, made flesh. That, Plixandra said slowly, is an unpackaged protein source. That is a dead animal that we are going to eat, Marcus corrected cheerfully. He dispatched the fish with quick efficiency that Vex Thorol appreciated from a practical standpoint, while his evolutionary hindbrain screamed about the wrongness of food that had a face. Who wants to try? What followed was 3 hours of the most humbling education Vex Thorol had experienced since his doctoral defense. Krellians, it turned out, were terrible at fishing. Their manipulators were too precise for the imprecise art of casting. Their patience was calibrated for laboratory procedures, not aquatic ambush predation. Their entire worldview had been constructed around food arriving on schedule, not food arriving when it felt like it. But they were also desperate, and desperation was an excellent motivator. By the time the local star began its descent, they had caught 6 fish. 6 organisms that had been swimming freely that morning and were now lying in a cooler, representing the difference between theoretical starvation and actual survival. Marcus gutted and cleaned them with practiced movements while explaining the anatomical structures, which helped Vex Thoral's scientific mind accept what his cultural conditioning was rejecting. Digestive tract out. Keep the meat. These are good eating. You folks can eat fish, right? Not poisonous to your biology. Our biochemistry is compatible with most carbon-based proteins, Vex Thoral confirmed, consulting his medical database. Though we have not consumed raw animal tissue in 3 millennia, good news, we are not eating it raw. We are going to cook it. Cook, Vex Thoral repeated. Controlled combustion for food preparation. You do have fire, right? Please tell me you have fire. We have plasma cutters. Marcus laughed that peculiar half-laugh again. Close enough. The next morning brought the seaweed lesson, which somehow managed to be even more surreal than learning to murder fish. See those brown fronds floating near the rocks? Marcus waded into the shallows, apparently unbothered by the small creatures that fled his approach. That is kelp. Edible, nutritious, and it does not run away. Easiest food you will ever harvest. He pulled up a long strand of the vegetation, water streaming off its length. To Vex Thoral, it looked like decorative algae. To Marcus, it apparently looked like lunch. You dry it in the sun, breaks down some of the tougher fibers. Then you can eat it as is, or rehydrate it in soups, or wrap other food in it. Marcus draped several strands over a rack he had constructed from driftwood and salvaged netting. Humans have been eating seaweed for thousands of years. Good iodine content, umami flavor, free food that literally washes up on your beach. Blixandra touched one of the fronds with scientific fascination. We have been cataloging this species for 2 months. Detailed cellular analysis, growth pattern documentation. We never considered consumption. That is because you all think like scientists instead of hungry people, Marcus said. Scientists observe. Hungry people eat. Sometimes you have to be both. They spent the day harvesting seaweed, which was significantly easier than fishing, and therefore more popular among the research team. The sight of a dozen Krellian researchers wading through tide pools, collecting armfuls of kelp like some kind of primitive gathering society, would have been unthinkable a week ago. Now it was survival, which had a way of making the unthinkable remarkably thinkable. The drying racks filled quickly. The beach began to smell like low tide and desperation, with underlying notes of hope. We are stealing technology from the star, Blixandra observed, watching the seaweed dehydrate in the stellar radiation. Solar energy for food preservation. This is somehow both primitive and elegant. Most old solutions are, Marcus agreed. Humans figured out you could keep food longer if you dried it, smoked it, salted it, fermented it. We got creative about not starving. Necessity is the mother of some really weird food practices. Vex Thoral, studying the efficient simplicity of evaporation-based preservation, felt something shift in his understanding. They had not forgotten how to acquire food through sophisticated advancement. They had simply built layers of complexity over basic principles, assuming those principles would never again be relevant. It was like forgetting that mathematics started with counting because calculators existed. We need a permanent workspace, he announced. If we are surviving on local resources until rescue arrives, we need proper facilities. You need a beach kitchen, Marcus said. I will help you build one. The construction took 2 days and involved materials that would have made any Krellian engineer file a safety complaint. Salvaged hull plating became countertops. Environmental monitoring equipment was repurposed into food storage. The plasma cutter that had previously been used for rock sampling became their primary cooking implement, mounted on a frame that Marcus insisted on calling the galaxy's most over-engineered barbecue. This violates approximately 47 equipment usage protocols. Vex Thorel noted, watching them install a makeshift ventilation system using atmospheric scrubber components. "This keeps you alive," Marcus countered. "Generally a higher priority." The kitchen took shape with the organized chaos of academic researchers applied to practical problems. They designed cleaning stations using their own sterilization equipment. They created storage areas with temperature regulation for their catches. They built preparation surfaces at heights optimized for Krellian anatomy. And in the center, surrounded by safety equipment that was probably unnecessary but made everyone feel better, they installed the cooking area. Controlled combustion for food preparation, Marcus explained again, demonstrating with a piece of fish. Heat denatures proteins, kills pathogens, improves digestibility and flavor. Humans have cooked food for hundreds of thousands of years. Fire was our first technology, before we even had language. He placed the fish on the heated surface. The sizzle was immediate and accompanied by an aroma that Vex Thorel's olfactory sensors registered as chemically complex and disturbingly appealing. "We are applying thermal energy to reorganize molecular structures," Plixandra said, her scientific brain apparently needing to frame this in acceptable terms. "It is chemical engineering with heat vectors." "It is cooking," Marcus said. "You can make it complicated, but fundamentally you are just making food hot until it tastes good." The fish cooked. The Krellians watched with the intensity of people observing either a miracle or a disaster, uncertain which. When Marcus declared it done and divided it among them, there was a hesitation that spoke to millennia of cultural conditioning. Vex Thorel took the first bite because leadership meant occasionally eating potentially problematic things before your subordinates did. The flavor hit his palate with unexpected complexity. Protein richness balanced by subtle mineral notes from the ocean. The texture was firm but yielded easily. His digestive system, confronted with actual food after a lifetime of optimized nutrition, sent back a report that essentially amounted to different but acceptable, possibly even enjoyable. "It is edible," he announced. "It is actually good," Plixandra added, sounding betrayed by her own taste receptors. Marcus grinned. "Welcome to food that does not come in packages. Now try it with the dried seaweed." The meal that followed was the strangest dinner party Vex Thorel had ever attended. Grilled fish wrapped in rehydrated kelp. Shellfish that Marcus had collected from tide pools cooked until their shells opened. Something Marcus called seaweed crisps that were just dried kelp toasted over heat until they became fragile and surprisingly addictive. They sat on the beach as the star set, eating food they had acquired themselves through methods their civilization had abandoned, and the absurdity of it was overwhelming. They were scientists, researchers. Their society had eliminated hunger through distribution networks and molecular optimization. And here they were, cooking fish over plasma cutters like their evolutionary ancestors, and finding it satisfying in a way that went beyond mere nutrition. "My ancestors did this," Plixandra said quietly. "Before the Provision Authority, before civilization, they caught fish and collected seaweed and cooked food over open flames. We have records of it in our cultural databases, museum exhibits, historical dramatizations, and you forgot it was practical, not just historical." Marcus said, "Happens to lots of species. You get good at advancement, you forget the basics. Then something breaks in your supply chain, and suddenly you remember that food originally came from nature, not factories. Vex Thorol consumed another piece of fish. Considering this, they had not lost the knowledge through some catastrophic event. They had simply decided it was no longer necessary, filed it away as historical curiosity, and moved on to more sophisticated concerns. The capacity had always been there, in their databases, their genetic memory, their environmental capabilities. They had just stopped considering it relevant. "We are idiots," he said. "Sophisticated idiots," Plixandra corrected. "There is a difference. Not a meaningful one when you are starving." Marcus stood, stretching with audible joint pops that made several Krellians flinch. "You are not idiots. You are specialized. Your civilization optimized for efficiency and forgot about redundancy happens all the time. Earth had societies that forgot how to navigate without GPS. Then satellites went down, and everyone remembered maps exist. You are saying this is normal civilizational amnesia," Vex Thorol said. "I am saying every species gets so good at solving problems that they forget what the original problems were." Marcus collected the dishes, salvaged equipment containers repurposed as plates. "You will be fine. You know how to fish now. You know seaweed is food. You built a kitchen out of research equipment and survival instinct. That is pretty good for a week's work." The rescue ship arrived on day 34, which was impressively close to the estimated schedule and far later than it felt. Vex Thorol met Captain Trixalorn at the dock, noting the captain's pristine uniform and well-fed appearance with a certain amount of resentment. "Administrator Vex Thorol, we came as quickly as possible after receiving your distress beacon. I understand you experienced a supply disruption." The captain's mandibles clicked with professional sympathy. "We have emergency rations sufficient for 3 months. You must have been in dire circumstances." "We managed," Vex Thorol said. "Managed? How?" Trixalorn looked genuinely confused. "The nearest supply depot is, we acquired food locally." "Locally? But this is a water world. There are no supply stations for." The captain stopped, his gill slits fluttering as comprehension dawned with visible horror. "You did not. We fished. We harvested seaweed. We built a cooking facility." Vex Thorol gestured toward the beach, where the kitchen still stood, surrounded by drying racks and storage containers. "The ocean, as it turns out, contains edible organisms." Trixalorn stared at the beach setup, like it was a historical reenactment that had escaped containment. "You consumed wild biological matter." "We consumed fish. It is nutritionally adequate and surprisingly palatable. But the protocols, the safety standards, the nutritional optimization," the captain seemed to be experiencing some kind of bureaucratic system crash. "You cannot just eat things from nature." "We absolutely can," Plixandra said, emerging from the facility with Marcus in tow. "In fact, we have been quite successful at it. Our human consultant taught us the fundamental principles of food acquisition." Marcus waved. "They are natural anglers now. Give them another month. They will be teaching classes." Captain Trixalorn looked at Marcus with the dawning horror of someone realizing that humans were involved, which meant logic had probably been optional throughout this entire situation. "You taught them to fish, and forage, and cook, and preserve food through solar dehydration." Marcus seemed entirely too pleased with himself. "Basically, I ran a 3-week course on how to not starve when the supply chain breaks." "This is," Trixalorn struggled for words. "This is highly irregular. This is survival," Vex Thorol corrected. "And you will be filing a very interesting incident report." The incident report took Vexed Horrell 4 hours to compose because the official forms did not have checkboxes for acquired food through primitive hunting and gathering techniques. He ended up attaching appendices that included Marcus's fishing instructions, nutritional analysis of local sea life, and photographs of their beach kitchen that looked like evidence from an anthropological study. The Provision Authority would probably have questions, many questions, possibly disciplinary hearings, but they would also have data on emergency food acquisition protocols for oceanic environments, which had apparently been absent from their databases because nobody had needed them in 17 centuries. Marcus departed 3 days after the rescue ship arrived, puttering away in his terrible boat toward his own geological survey site. He left behind sketches of fishing equipment, cooking instructions translated into Galactic Standard, and a beach kitchen that Vexed Horrell had quietly decided to keep operational. Just in case, he told his research team, supply chains can break, now we know what to do. Standing on the beach, watching the human disappear toward the horizon, Vexed Horrell reflected on the profound absurdity of advanced civilization. They could manipulate quantum fields and traverse galactic distances. They could sequence genomes and construct habitats in hostile environments. They had eliminated hunger through technological marvel and logistical mastery. And when their sophisticated system failed, they had needed a sunburned human to teach them that the ocean was full of food and fire made it taste better. The Provision Authority had solved hunger 17 centuries ago. They had just forgotten to include a footnote about what happened when the solution stopped working. Somewhere in their databases, buried under layers of efficiency optimization and distribution algorithms, were the old ways, the basic ways. The ways that every species learned before they learned to reach for the stars, ways that involved hooks, patience, and the understanding that food did not begin in a package. It began in nature, waiting for someone hungry enough to figure out how to acquire it. Vexed Horrell returned to the beach kitchen, where Plixandra was attempting to grill something that might have been a fish, or might have been an optimistic mistake. The smell was promising, even if the technique needed work. They were scientists, researchers, representatives of an advanced civilization that had conquered the galaxy through intelligence and innovation. They were also, apparently, fishermen now. The galaxy would just have to deal with that particular evolutionary regression, right alongside humanity's baffling refusal to stop doing things the complicated way, when the simple way worked perfectly well. Somewhere in the universe, the Provision Authority's computers were probably already generating alerts about unauthorized food acquisition and primitive survival methodology. Let them. Vexed Horrell had a beach kitchen, functioning fishing equipment, and the knowledge that when systems failed, hunger did not care about sophistication, it cared about solutions. And sometimes solutions smelled like grilled fish and tasted like humility, served fresh from an ocean that had been there all along, waiting for someone to remember it was more than just scenery.